Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. And what I'm doing this week is I am turning my attention to the 1997 ABC TV miniseries adaptation of Stephen King's third novel and the second live action adaptation of that novel, and that is the infamous. Use the adjective that you would like to choose to describe this particular movie, which is Stephen King's The Shining. And I want to be clear that it is called Stephen King's The Shining for a number of reasons. It is not to be confused with The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, the classic 1980s movie that is not only one of the best horror movies of all time, not just one of the best Stephen King adaptations of all time. And yes, I know that that is a divisive thing to say, but it's also one of the greatest movies of all time. Full stop. Stephen King's The Shining, the 1997 ABC TV miniseries, I am not sure if it can hold those same qualifications. And when I originally did this podcast, I avoided reviewing the ABC TV miniseries because the Kubrick version is so strong, and I wanted to talk about that. And because also at when I started the podcast back in 2014, I had a lot of work to do. The Shining is Stephen King's third novel, so by that point in the original publication, or the original release of these episodes, I had reviewed Carrie, and then I examined the Brian De Palma Carrie movie, and then the 2013 movie Remake, and then I reviewed Salem's Lot, and then the Tobe Hooper Salem's Lot movie, and then I reviewed The Shining. So at that point, I had less than 10 episodes under my belt and I was just chipping. I had just barely made a dent in the Stephen King bibliography, so I didn't want to spend that much time with projects that I wasn't really excited about reviewing at the time, and knowing that I had so much to do. So now that I have completed that original mission of the Stephen King cast, and now that I'm going back and I'm trying to make it as comprehensive as possible for everyone's listening enjoyment, it is time to actually talk about The Shining, Stephen King's The Shining, and to place it into context of where Stephen King was at that time. We'll talk about the feud of Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick, if you want to call it that, and just pull this three-part movie apart and see what works, see what doesn't work, and in doing so, we'll kind of get to the essence of what makes The Shining work as a story, not just the novel, but also that core story that has been able to be translated from book to movie to TV movie, and then incorporated into Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep in 2019. So there's a lot to discuss for a movie that hasn't really withstood the passage of time. So I'm excited to talk about the Shining. So if you haven't checked out Stephen King's The Shining and you're only familiar with the Stanley Kubrick version, first of all, I completely understand, but hey, I rented it on Apple, and there's worse ways to spend a few hours. If nothing else, it takes you right back to the late 90s or the mid 90s, which is something that I have really been enjoying on the current stretch of the podcast that I've been doing lately. And I'll talk about that in some other episodes. But right now, let's just focus on The Shining. But before I get there, I just want to remind everyone that you can reach out at any time to talk about your thoughts on The Shining. And this is actually a good one to really send your thoughts on, because the conversation around the adaptation of Kubrick's version and Stephen King's displeasure of it for so long has been a point of conversation and debate among Stephen King fans for decades. So I know that when the TV miniseries came out back in the day, there were those of us who were excited to see Stephen King's version. And so if you have any thoughts on how well this has aged, if it hasn't aged, how it stands up against Kubrick, write into StephenKingcast@yahoo.com. Also, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. That would really help me out. And you can follow me on the following socials: Facebook, TikTok, where I do little lore dumps, quick little lore deep dives. You can follow me on Blue Sky and on Instagram. So thank you, everyone, for those of you who have followed, liked, and subscribed. And okay, so what we're going to do now, we're just going to get into it. All right, so this is from Wikipedia. I'm just going to talk about the production of this a little bit. The Shining, stylized as Stephen King's The Shining, is a 1997 three-part horror television miniseries based on the 1977 Stephen King novel of the same name. Directed by Mick Garris from Stephen King's teleplay, it is the second adaptation of King's book after the 1980 film by Stanley Kubrick, and was written and produced by King due to his dissatisfaction with Kubrick's version. The miniseries was shot at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, King's inspiration for the novel, in March 1996. The 1997 adaptation stars Steven Weber as Jack Torrance, Rebecca De Mornay as Jack's wife Wendy, Courtland Mead as Courtland Mead as Danny, and Will Horneff as a different aged version of Danny, Melvin Van Peebles as Dick Halloran, Pat Hingle, Elliot Gould, John Turbin, Stanley Anderson, Lisa Thornhill, and Garris's wife Cynthia appear in supporting roles. Several notable writers and filmmakers working in the horror genre cameo in the miniseries' ballroom scene, and King himself appears in as an orchestra conductor. Originally airing from April 27th to May 1st, 1997 on the American Television Broadcast Network ABC, The Shining enjoyed a favorable reception when it first aired. It was a ratings hit, being in the top 20 of daily viewership numbers for all 3 episodes, acclaimed by critics for its careful pacing, makeup, depth, sound editing, and creepy atmosphere, and won 2 Primetime Emmy and 2 Saturn Awards. However, retrospective critics have viewed the miniseries less fondly, declaring it boring and unfocused, and comparing it unfavorably to Kubrick's film version. Okay, so that right there, this is me interjecting again. That right there is the ride that I took on it. When I first watched it, I enjoyed it. I was also younger and completely enamored by Stephen King. I was at the height of my Stephen King fandom, and I was deeply into the Stephen King ABC TV miniseries at that time, which, we have seen It, The Stand, The Tommyknockers, The Langoliers, and now we had this with Stephen King coming back to reclaim the title of The Shining and make it his own. I was completely for it. So that's how I felt at the time, and we'll get into how I feel about it later. But let's get into the plot of The Shining for those of you who are not familiar before I get into my analysis. The alcoholism and explosive temper that cost Jack Torrance his teaching job also threatens to tear apart his family after assaulting his 7-year son Danny in a drunken rage. Horrified, Jack tells his wife Wendy that should he ever start drinking again, he will leave them one way or another, implying he preferred suicide to the risk of harming his loved ones again. As part of his budding sobriety, Jack takes a high-paying job as a winter caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, a picturesque summer resort in the Colorado Rockies. He's hopeful the isolation will give him time to complete writing his first play. Manager Stuart Ullman explains the game Denver Croquet, with its oversized mallets and balls, was invented by the hotel founder Horace Derwent. Danny discovers he can communicate telepathically with the Overlook's head cook, Dick Halloran, who tells the boy that he too shines. Surprised at the power of Danny's mind, Halloran departs on a mandatory vacation and tells him to contact him if he needs help. Halloran will hear, wherever he is, a malevolent force within the hotel determined to use Danny reveals itself. Visions foreshadow that the Torrances will encounter over the winter. Danny is also visited by Tony, an older man who shows him visions of the events to come. Jack hears things while exploring the memorabilia-crammed basement. Danny tells Wendy that Jack has become increasingly obsessed with the hotel's history and has become hostile towards him. Wendy wants to leave before the snow gets too deep, but Jack, obsessed with papers he's found, persuades her to stay. He hears his late father's voice from the Overlook's CB radio telling him Danny must be punished. Jack smashes the radio with a mallet. Danny encounters the hideous ghost of a woman who committed suicide who grabs him and says, "We've all been waiting for you." The Torrances find Danny dazed with bruises on his neck and lipstick on his cheek. He tells them the ghosts forced him to go into the hotel's forbidden room 217. Halloran was wrong when he said that the ghosts could not hurt them. Wendy tries to escape, but Jack sabotages the snowmobile that is their only means of escape through the harsh winter weather. A desperate Danny shines to Halloran, who hastily leaves Florida to find them. The spirits of the Overlook invite Jack into the hotel's shuttered ballroom and ply him with alcohol. Delbert Grady, the Overlook's former caretaker who murdered his family and killed himself, tends bar and invites Jack into a party where he sees dozens of deceased guests. Grady tells Jack that he belongs in this world of depravity, but first he must murder his family and Halloran. Wendy knocks Jack out. They lock Jack in a cooler. She and Danny agree it's not Daddy, it's the hotel. However, Grady frees Jack, who assaults Wendy. Injured, she screams for Danny to hide and hobbles away. Warned by Grady, Jack ambushes Halloran and beats him. Derwin sends Jack to get Danny, and Wendy rouses Halloran. Tony shows Danny that the boiler is about to explode. Danny brings Jack a bloody nightmare to himself briefly and tells him about the boiler. Jack races to fix it, and Danny shines to his father, who reverses the valve. Danny, Wendy, and Halloran escape. Accepting his fate, Jack kills himself by triggering a massive steam explosion that levels the Overlook. 10 years later, around the age of 17, Danny graduates from high school. He now physically resembles Tony, who is implied to have been his future self. Wendy and Halloran are present, as is Jack's spirit, telling Danny he loves him. In Colorado, as crews work to rebuild the Overlook, the spirits can be heard playing croquet. Okay, so I will get into my commentary on the three-part movie now, starting with part one. As the credits roll, we have ghostly voiceover of what sounds like abuse, a child being hit. And the first thing that we see is Commissioner Gordon himself, Pat Hingle, and Brian Hackett himself, Steven Weber, giving us this versions of Jack Torrance. Now, right off the bat, I have to say that I give Mick Garris and Stephen King credit for opening the way that they do. It's not flashy, it is not spooky, it is not psychologically torturous, but what it is different. We have seen Jack Torrance on screen before. We have seen the ghosts of the Overlook on screen before. We have seen the Overlook itself on screen before. We have seen Danny Torrance on the screen. We've seen the isolation of the Overlook in contrast to the Rocky Mountains before. We've seen horror in the snow before. We've seen the devolution of Jack Torrance's sanity before. But famously, the boiler plot and the ticking time bomb of the plot we have not seen before. This was not present in the Stanley Kubrick version of the movie. So to begin with this, not only does it rope in the long dormant plot that had been absent in the original adaptation, but what it does, it distances itself from the original movie by providing us with a new entry into this hotel, into these characters, and this plot, saying that this is different. So this is an effective way to start. Pat Hingle, the maintenance man, walks Jack and us through the system for operating the boiler, the reason for doing it, and constantly talks crap about his boss, Mr. Ullman. And Ingle, being a person of real value, as opposed to the glossy polish of Ullman, is able to tell Jack and us the more truthful things about the Overlook and its sordid history. We get a story of a beautiful woman who took her life, and the caretaker Grady, who also took his own life. And after talking about rats and scandals and how every hotel has a combination of this, Jack wonders about ghosts. Every hotel has its ghosts after all, but Hingle quickly, almost too quickly, dismisses it. We then get the exterior shot of this version of the overlook, which, like the boiler, immediately showcases the lawn-shaped hedged animals, which had been revised in the Kubrick version into a hedge maze. And it should be noted that this version of the Overlook is filmed at the original hotel that inspired the Overlook in the first place, the Stanley Hotel. So I'm happy for the Stanley Hotel. I'm very happy for Stephen King to be able to do this, because whether you like it or not, he was able to get his more faithful adaptation based on his own personal experiences here. Similarly, we get the croquet mallets, which were in the book, and the changes in the movie turn them from a croquet mallet to an axe, wielded famously by Jack Nicholson. We then meet Elliot Gould's Mr. Ullman, who walks him across the grounds, giving a history of the Denver croquet and Horace Derwent. It's at this moment where Ullman tears Jack down for his alcoholism, in doing so establishing the conflict that Jack will have to face during his time in the hotel. We then get the beginning of the character trait that is not necessarily the alcoholism itself, but deep-seated anger issues that had manifested when he spotted a student of his slashing his tires in a flashback. So we're establishing here that Jack is saying that it's his alcoholism, and we're talking about alcoholism, but it is not alcoholism alone or insanity like the Jack Nicholson version, but something more festering and bubbling beneath him that is inherently tied to who he is. Now that we've met Jack, we meet Wendy and Danny. Already we have significant differences to the Kubrick version. The Kubrick version of these characters are haunted by an unspoken anxiety. Wendy, even before the isolation of the Overlooked, played by Shelley Duvall, is defined by a nervous skittishness. Most likely, if you go back to my review, most likely from unspoken abuse from, or at the very least, fear of her husband. And I think that it extends past the abuse that we know about. I think based on the actions and based on, like I said, Tony being manifested as a voice coming from within his mouth, there's a man living inside his mouth. There's an implication there that I think, and a danger to Jack and what he means to the family that I think speaks beyond just alcoholism and him once hurting Danny. I think that there's something going on a little bit more there. So this Wendy, played by Rebecca De Mornay, is an actual character who will distance herself from Shelley Duvall throughout the course of this miniseries that I'll talk about as I go along. In a flashback, we watch a very melodramatic sequence in which Jack, drunk, takes his anger out on Danny, breaking his arm. It's full of wooden delivery and stilted dialogue in which Jack calls Danny pup and tells him to take his medicine. I'll get into this in the Stephen Kingisms portion of this podcast, but yes, this is the catchphrase. And we're going to hear these again, pup and take his medicine. And this is why I admire Mike Flanagan so much. Mike Flanagan, who has adapted Dr. Sleep, who has adapted Gerald's Game, who has adapted The Life of Chuck, and fingers crossed is going to adapt The Dark Tower. He's also producing a Carrie series, which will be coming out in 2026, fingers crossed. So the reason why I bring up Mike Flanagan is because he's someone who understands the feeling of Stephen King dialogue. And what he is able to do so successfully is not fall into the trap of Stephen King dialogue that in hands of lesser directors or writers or actors sounds clunky or cartoonish. This is such an essential scene. This is us not just being told about Jack's alcoholism. We are seeing Jack's alcoholism and the effects of Jack's alcoholism, not just on his career or on the decisions that he makes, but on how it affects those that are closest in his life, his family, his wife, his son, his baby son. And this should be the foundation of the rest of this movie. And unfortunately, this foundation is it's not solid because it's almost more important that we establish the terminology pup and take your medicine rather than really getting into how this should land and the devastation that it will that it wrought on his family. It's just, to me, that these types of Stephen Kingisms just don't work on the screen. But anyway, later in bed, the couple discusses what occurred in the most basic, bland characters speaking their feelings without any nuance fashion possible. In my review of Kubrick's version, I discussed like I already said, the insinuation that Danny's being abused by Jack. Like I said, that Tony's in his mouth, and like why Wendy is a constant basket of nerves. It points to something dark and unspoken. In contrast here, these character conflicts are blatant, obvious, stilted. And to make matters worse for them, Danny has a vision brought to you by a floating Tony, an effect and a choice that isn't nearly as effective as the creepy voice that the original Danny actor puts on, and just how simple that is, right? You just have a kid making a creepy voice, and he won't stop doing it. And when a child is not acting themselves, and doing that, and it's happening within the nightmarish dream world of Kubrick's atmosphere, it really does create a tension and a dread and an anxiety simply by having a child actor make a creepy voice. In contrast, this floating man, to me, is less impactful. So anyway, this Tony says that he has a vision of being in the Overlook, and we see a silhouette of a monstrous Jack approaching Danny while giving his Stephen King catchphrases of "Come here, pup, and take your medicine." And then Jack returns, and while Jack celebrates seeing his son and throwing him in the air, Wendy demonstrates hesitation. Though she is actively working to forgive him, it's clear that she hasn't forgotten what has happened, nor should she. In this version, they acknowledge Danny has, at least they're comfortable tiptoeing around and talking about. They're not hiding the fact that he has demonstrated, has an understanding of knowing things that he shouldn't. And so as parents, this is something they have seen and witnessed and are actively speaking about. And I like this. I like that it's just not something that is not being talked about. And this this concept and this particular angle that the parents discuss, what they have witnessed with their own eyes living with their own child, is more fully explored in Dr. Sleep as well. After a call to his sponsor, and resisting temptation while looking at a bar, Jack then and his family hop in the car and head into the mountains for their stay at the fated Overlook Hotel. Before they arrive, they stop off at a scenic rest stop, and Mick Garris is able to film the Rockies in all of their natural beauty. Now, I what I like about this is that, as I said, the Kubrick version is a haunted film throughout. There's danger and there's menace in every swooping loop through the mountains. Here, the natural beauty suggests hope and wonder for this family, making the upcoming tragedy more heartbreaking than horrifying. What's not horrifying is the 1997 special effects of the fast clouds moving over the Overlook and the CGI faces upon them warning Danny. Similarly, the reemergence of Floating Tony is more goofy than anything else. There's a temptation here at every given decision that is made to show what was on the page, which isn't always the most successful choice. Again, I've always said when it comes to adaptations, it's not just about taking what was written and just translating it as is, but looking into it and seeing what works about it and what is at the heart of it that made it work on the page. And rather than just copying and pasting, finding what works in the new medium to convey that same sense of, in this case, splashing cold water on a happy moment and insinuating that danger is on its way. So arriving at the Overlook, Danny sees the animal hedges, and Jack and Wendy laugh about Jack's bawdy dad jokes. So here we're seeing a happy family, which we never see in the Kubrick version, and that was the one of the issues that Stephen King had. So it's good that we're actually getting to spend time with them as a family. Yes, with some history, not always being happy, but there is some hope here. Despite hesitation, there is hope and there is love. In the Overlook, we are reintroduced to Pat Hingle's Pete Wilson and are introduced to Melvin Van Peebles' interpretation of Dick Halloran. He's a flashy, charismatic cook, and immediately he senses Danny's gift. And with his mind, he begins to speak to Danny using The Shining. We learn about The Shining. He explains that The Shining to both Danny, the audience, and as Danny walks Dick to his car to discuss The Shining, we see that the car itself is a Plymouth Fury, the same car more famously known as Christine. While Danny is with Dick, Pete gives the Torrances a tour through the hotel, spending time in the kitchen, and one more time gives the reality of the winters in these mountains and how isolated they will be. Outside, Dick gives Danny the warning about seeing things here at the Overlook and discusses a room that may or may not be room 217. As the family is given the tour by Dick, Danny experiences a few ghostly appearances and uses Dick's suggestions to count to 10 to get away from them. After Dick leaves, settling, and days later, while on the roof, Jack is stung by the hornet's nest and nearly falls off the roof. After killing the hornets, Jack makes the unwise decision to let Danny have the nest. And why? I mean, even if the hornets appear to be dead, wouldn't you want to at least wait? And then when Wendy asks him if it's safe, he says, and again, I don't know why, he says, it's a hornet's nest. It's as safe can be, which is not safe at all. Jack, hornets' nests are not known for their safety. And I bring this up because, again, the hornet's nest and the ghost hornets that arrive are a plot in the book. And it's, again, transplanted from page to screen here. But does it add to a menace or dread or a sinking feeling? Maybe your mileage will vary. But for me, it doesn't. If anything, it shows some bad decision making on Jack's part. Now, the benefit to the miniseries format is that it allows the story to breathe. Whether it's Danny reading with Wendy or Jack giving him a goodnight kiss, the pace allows you to spend these downtime moments with the family, which is essential if you're going to tell the story of its destruction. But it's not just about the character moments. It's also about this need for Danny to learn how to read. An obsession discussed between Wendy and Jack. Which I assume is because of when he's seeing Red Rum, but which is asked later on, but there's no real resolution from Red Rum. It's much more impactful in the movie than it is in this adaptation, because it's never a question. I'll get to Red Rum later. But this obsession for Danny to want to read, I thought was going to be linked to him seeing the backwards words Red Rum, and him trying to figure that out. Anyway, when they talk, Danny locks himself in the bathroom, and the parents have to bust the door down to find Danny in a fugue state, foaming at the mouth. And Jack does not handle it well, shouting at Danny to stop what he believes is nonsense talk, and in his aggression knocks Danny's head against the back of a toilet. It's hard to watch. Later that night, Danny is awoken and stung viciously by the hornets, which, surprise, surprise, aren't dead. To make matters worse, they hear noise from somewhere else in the hotel, chairs falling down. And as the first episode comes to a close, the ghosts of the Overlook play Denver croquet and a celebration at their newest meal ticket while the animal hedges loom large. Part 2. The Torrance family tries to live a life as close to normalcy in Colorado as they can before the snow falls. In Sidewinder, Jack attends an AA meeting while Wendy takes Danny to a doctor for his recent episode, which Wendy is fearing to be a seizure. This is a good conversation with an observant and kindly doctor played by Michael O'Neill. You'll recognize him, and you may remember him as Special Agent Ron Butterfield from The West Wing, who astutely deduces that there's a lot of stress in the family, eventually leading to the question of how Danny broke his arm. This gives Rebecca De Mornay a nice acting moment when she demonstrates vulnerability, melancholy, protectiveness, and a little bit of denial that they're going to be able to get through this. And in the bowels of the Overlook, Jack begins to explore and discover old newspapers and scrapbooks throughout the years, which gives us a flashback to the masquerade party. He's interrupted by spooky voices in the shadows. He continues reading into the sordid past of the Overlook, which gives us more flashbacks to earlier times, in this case, a mob hit. Shortly after, the snow starts to fall, and the family enjoys some frolicking outside. Later, while Jack shovels, and looking at how much he has to shovel, there's no amount of money that you could pay me to be the caretaker at this hotel. Yes, and I understand that I would rather take this job under the threat of ghosts than having to shovel what Jack has to shovel. That my back hurts so much just looking at that. So Jack is shoveling. Danny explores the hotel, determined to prove that he's not afraid. And just as he's about to enter room 217, he's stopped by Tony, who warns him to leave it alone. Here is a decision that Mick Garris makes that I really want to point out, from a complimentary standpoint. We are looking at Danny through the peephole of the room. Someone is watching Danny. It's one of the first perspectives we see from the ghosts who are waiting and watching Danny. And it's the first time while watching this that I got creeped out and unsettled. That decision to put us in the perspective of the ghosts, and I'll get to the ghosts later on, but this is the first time there was a malevolence and that there was a danger. There was the first time that something is else in the hotel with them. And I understand that we've heard voices. I understand that chairs fell down. And I understand that we've seen like a little CGI winking Delbert Grady at Danny. Get all of that. Understand that. But this is the first time with a simple camera trick of looking through a peephole. It's the first time and one of the only times there was a real air of menace and danger for the kid, for the characters, and for us as viewers. Now, just as Danny is about to unlock the room, he's warned once more by Tony, who is adamant this time. Seconds later, the hose comes off the wall and scares Danny. So again, what to you is more scary? The hose coming off of the wall or the simple perspective of someone looking through a peephole? When he returns the key to the office, he's intercepted by Jack, who is strangely distant, detached, and threatening. It's a weird performance. It really stood out to me because it's not what I would expect from the progression of the character's descent into possession. And it's more in line with the glazed lunacy of Jack Nicholson, which feels very out of place in this movie and what you would expect from this version of Jack Torrance at this stage of the story. The spell he's under breaks when Danny is afraid he's going to hurt him, and we see the switch to the loving father who cares about his kid. The night when he tucks him in, they have a conversation around whether or not they should leave. I really like that Wendy here is more protective and rational, even when faced with the seemingly impossible. And it's here where we first see red rum. Danny watches it bleed on the wall and asks her what it means. And again, this is where I thought like the whole needing to read part came in. Now, let's talk about red rum for a second. I love how innocent it sounds. Red rum. It's a childlike word. It's not abnormal for a kid to ask a parent about a non-existent word, and that's the genius of this. But that simple word red rum had become such a massive pop cultural imprint, and such a major part of that original movie. There's to the point where when Flanagan made Doctor Sleep, red rum was very clearly in the marketing for this movie because of our relationship with that word. It's wild to me to think of a time when red rum was not red rum, when red rum was a strange word that a child was using only to learn that it was murder spelled backwards. I can't, I was not born when the movie came out. I have never known a time when red rum wasn't the backwards version. I don't know if people watching it for the first time knew what it was, or if that was a reveal in the movie theater. I don't know. But regardless, it is a massive part of pop culture, and it's just it's not a fault of this movie at all. The word itself, the effects that they use for it later on are, but it should be included because it is. I don't think that it takes away from this movie having been such a large part of the Kubrick version. And again, Danny being a child and saying childlike words, I think really speaks to the reality of this family. Jack and Wendy have marital difficulties with him focusing on the duties of a caretaker instead of being with his wife, and she calls him out for his behavior, which is basically how he acted when he was drunk. Now, this reframes that earlier scene that I saw with him with Danny. I was just like, what is going on with this progression? So I like that his slow possession by the Overlook and his slipping into insanity is tied directly to his alcoholism. It's not just temptation. It's not that he is substituting addiction of alcoholism with this research piece. It's the way that he's acting. Is that it's like this phantom drunkenness that he has, or his phantom hangover. He is distant. He's moody. He's irritable. He's lost in his own thoughts. There's a quiet danger to him, and distractibility, and so once she said that made a little bit more sense to me, and I like that decision. That in this ghost world that they're living in, this ghost drunkenness, this ghost hangover is taking over Steven Weber's character. Jack explains that he believes that writing a book about the Overlook using the scrapbooks, the registrations, the photos, the newspapers will lead him to become a best-selling author, and hides behind the excuse of doing it for his family, not unlike Walter White's justification for his meth empire in Breaking Bad. The next day or days later, while Jack is heading through the snow to clear the playground miniature of the Overlook starts to come to life. At first, it's the smallest of the hedge animals, having appeared to have moved. And then the playground comes to life. The seesaw goes up and down. The hedge animals start moving like the weeping angels do in Doctor Who. The swing starts swinging, and Jack gets hit by a wayward swing. The animals start moving closer, and all of this is just, again, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. It looks goofy. The menace of him being attacked by a swing, is that scary? I mean, in this grand experiment to take from the page and to make it more faithful, is this a better decision than Come Play With Us, Danny? Is this a better decision than the elevator doors opening? Is this a better decision than just watching the face of Jack Nicholson hold his head in his hand while he stares out into the middle distance, frozen in insanity? Is this a better decision? I would argue it's really not. Yes, it shows that ghosts are there, but the ghosts are not a danger to the soul and the mind as much as they are to your forehead, and that's not as scary to me. On Christmas, Jack starts losing it, and he hears the voice of his dead father over the CB radio, played by the night flyer himself, Richard Dees, or better known to Twin Peaks fans as Special Agent Albert Rosenfield, Miguel Ferrer, rest in peace. He also played Lloyd Henreid in Mick Garris' The Stand, so it's a nice little reunion here. Hearing his voice unexpectedly, brought a smile to my face. So here I am recording this the day after the anniversary of David Lynch's passing, which, celebrity deaths, when they hit, I'm not always affected, but I remember distinctly I was in bed reading Grady Hendrix's Wayward Home for Witchcraft, and I think that's the title of the book. And I just kind of looked over, checked my phone on Facebook, and I saw one post, and this was before all the news started coming out, one post that someone thought that David Lynch was dead. And I'm scrolling, I'm refreshing, and then I'm checking CNN, nothing yet. I'm checking Google, nothing yet. And then it starts happening, and the realization that David Lynch had left us. That really affected me for quite some time, actually. I was in a funk for most of January after that. It really, really got me. But the good thing was I was able to then just really appreciate David Lynch. And I went back to Twin Peaks one more time, and it was wonderful, always wonderful to absorb Twin Peaks, as I've done many, many times before. But this time, there was an extra level of sadness and appreciation for what was given. Anyway, the reason I say this is because, Miguel Ferrer has passed, and he passed a while ago. But to have him be so close with David Lynch in Twin Peaks: The Return, and to read this right after the anniversary of David Lynch's passing is really hitting home right now. Okay, so here, as the Overlook pretends to be Jack's father, he belittles him and tells him that Danny isn't where he's supposed to be. Not in his right mind, Jack then takes the croquet mallet and smashes the CB radio to silence the voice of his father, effectively cutting off the only means of communication to the outside. So I've had issues with the inconsistency of Weber's performance throughout this TV miniseries so far, but the immediate breakdown that he has following this destruction and the horrified fear of what's happening to him is really effective. And I wish they had leaned more into this than the constant come take your medicine, chewing on the aspirin, pop. This was really good. I really liked this. And it just happens for like 10 seconds. And you feel bad for him because he's recognizing that something's happening that he doesn't control. He can't control. Meanwhile, Danny enters room 217 and discovers the ghostly woman in the tub, and quickly learns that the ghosts here are indeed more than the pictures in a book. So the woman in the tub clearly is a famous scene from the movie. And when Jack explores, following the Danny having bruises on him, Jack sees the woman in the tub, and it's really scary and haunting and effective. So this is a very it's as close to a I don't want to say shot for shot, but the way that a scene plays out, what you expect from an adaptation of The Shining, it's as close to what Kubrick did, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that you're going to get from anything else in this version. Jack goes into a fugue state of his own, and when he comes to, he sees the smashed CB radio and has no recollection of it. He blames Danny, and here's where the show starts to pick up a little bit more. The Overlook is really starting to have its hooks in Jack, and that mixture of madness and possession start to take over. He looks manic. He's out of control. He's shouting, threatening, holding the croquet mallet like a weapon, and screaming through the hotel for Danny to come here. Wendy, rightfully so, is concerned and tries to reason with him. But when she sees that Danny is standing there non-verbally with bruises all over his neck, she's had enough of Jack. And it's great to see this character take charge and be an active force to oppose Jack and the Overlook. Her threatening to kill Jack in his sleep redeems the skittish and terrified version of Wendy portrayed in the Kubrick version. Danny comes to and explains to his parents about the woman in room 217, the ghosts, and the shining. He warns them that if they don't leave soon, they won't be able to leave at all. Jack heads up to room 217 to investigate. There he finds wet footprints, the lipstick, and the ghostly silhouette of the woman in the bathtub. He does the smart thing and runs out of the room. But though he has separated himself from the room, he can't escape the Overlook, and the ghosts tighten their rein on him. He succumbs to his anger, threatens Danny, and this kicks off a heated argument between Jack and Wendy in front of Danny, who screams at them to stop. It's a really hard scene to watch, not in a bad way, but from Danny's perspective, to watch these two anchors in his life just battling each other and smashing against each other. And in this moment right now, the place that they're staying is coming after Danny, and he needs his parents more than ever, and they're screaming at each other. It's hard. It's hard as a parent. Like, you never want this for your kid. And so this is an effective moment, and you don't get this from the Kubrick version, where it is so much about Jack, and it is so much about madness, and it is so much about danger. And you can understand why King wanted to redo parts of why he wanted to redo this, because he wanted to focus on the humanity, and he wanted to focus on this family. And I can understand the reason, the rationale, but here it's very effective. It works very well. The next day, when Jack checks out the snowmobile, he sees a note from management along with the croquet mallet, and he is visited by the spirit of Horace Derwent, who encourages him to give in to his anger. And in control by the ghosts, he destroys the snowmobile and quickly forgets. Danny plays in the snow in the playground, and the ghosts lure Wendy away and lock her in Ullman's office, leaving Danny at the mercy of the approaching hedge animals. And I know that Stephen King wanted the true version of events of this book, including the hedge animals. But again, I've said it, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I don't think that at any time, including today, moving hedge animals would look threatening. And certainly the technology wasn't there in 1997, but it's just not scary. It's not. And this is where the episode concludes. Part 3. Wendy smashes the glass and gets Danny before the hedge animals can. Jack dismisses the concerns of moving topiaries despite having seen them himself. That night, they hear the elevator and they investigate Jack slipping into denial and insanity. And again, I love seeing the Wendy character take a proactive role, climbing into the elevator to prove that's more than a short fuse, throwing the confetti, the underwear, and the masks at Jack in defiance of his denial. It's sad, though, to see Danny wish that he were someone else, someone who wasn't the target of the Overlook, someone whose parents didn't yell or push. Danny has a vision of a possessed Jack stalking him through the Overlook, and a reappearance of Red Rum. We hear the voice of Tony telling him that he will remember what Jack forgot. The vision causes Danny to send a distress signal to Dick, who gets the message loud and clear all the way in Florida and immediately runs to help. We get another cameo from a stand survivor, Shawnee Smith, who played Julie Lowry in the Mick Garris version. The Torrances are going to need all the help they can get because Jack wanders into the bar room, which is now fully stocked. Danny is visited by the dog mask-wearing Horace Derwent while Jack stumbles around cartoonishly drunk. I preferred the what we had seen prior to this, the detached, belittling, distracted, annoyed portrayal of his drunkenness. To me, I discussed this in my review of the Tommyknockers. The over-the-top, cartoonish, drunken portrayal, stumbling around, it doesn't feel real to me. And again, perhaps, you have encountered such immersion in alcohol consumption that this is what alcoholism looks like. I think, you know what I think of in Succession? It wasn't alcohol, but it was pills, I believe. Kendall Roy is an addict, and Kendall Roy is many things, and one of the things he is uptight all the time. And in the first season, he's uptight, he's insecure, he's just this tensed muscle of cringe and anxiety, and imposter syndrome and narcissism. And he's sober, but there's a scene where he takes the drugs, and you know what we don't get this. We don't get this loud, like flailing arms and boisterous, behavior. What the way that he plays it, Jeremy Strong, is he's so relaxed. For the first time, the muscle unclenches, and kind of unfortunately for this character, he's his best self. Like, he's relaxed, he's calm, he seems at peace with himself. And that seems more real to me than what I see here from these televised, like, really campy versions of being drunk. It really bothers me. Him being distracted, him being belittling, him being mean, while still being very human and grounded in a human performance is something that I thought was done well. But this is goofy, I liked the idea that the overlook was causing him to feel and act drunk and or hung over, even without the alcoholism, even without the consumption of a drink. I thought that was interesting, and it allowed Weber to play the character realistically, if not always consistently. This, however, it's just a cartoon stumbling around, and it's a trope that I personally reject whenever I see it. The ghost of Delbert Grady as bartender encourages Jack to head to the ballroom. In the ballroom, it's full of ghostly partygoers. He's seduced by the ghosts. His glass is regularly topped off by Grady, who encourages Jack to correct Danny and Wendy. Jack asks permission if he can let them go, but through Grady, the Overlook insists that Danny must be dealt with firmly. It doesn't take long. Jack violently attacks Wendy and throws Danny. Seeing what he's done shakes him long enough for Wendy to smash a Jack Daniels bottle over his head. They drag Jack to the cooler and lock him in, much like the Kubrick version. Dick gets closer, provided a vehicle by director Sam Raimi. Jack escapes, and Wendy sees red rum written on the wall. This would have been more impactful if Danny hadn't already discovered that it's murder backwards. Wendy has confetti thrown at her by the ghosts, drops her knife, and is confronted by the possessed, mallet-wielding Jack. Wendy calls for Danny to run and hide. Jack taunts Wendy, dances around, swings the mallet, and thankfully his monologuing buys her enough time to throw a croquet ball at his head. The couple isn't doing too well, both stumbling on a getaway chase, leading to the recreation of the famous Here's Johnny scene. We get the door smashing, we get the face in the smashed door, except instead of Here's Johnny, he simply says boo. So it kind of subverts the expectation. I'm glad that they zigged instead of zagging, or zagging instead of zig. He stalks off to go take care of Dick. Now, with Dick in the movie, the murder of Dick is often talked about, because he shows up and immediately gets an axe to the back. But at least he doesn't see Jack coming for him the way that he does here. Here, Dick just stands there and is completely confused as a clearly murderous, bloody, weapon-wielding Jack stumbles out of the elevator slowly towards him and doesn't move when he gets clonked by the mallet. Jack closes in on Wendy, goaded by Grady and Derwent, who have special effects applied over his face. God damn, it looks terrible. It looks so bad. Jack can't go through with this and goes off in search of Danny instead, smashing everything in his sight, while Danny has a vision from Tony about the forgotten boiler. Eventually, the blood-soaked, smiling Jack finds Danny. Jack tries fighting off the ghosts inside his head. He holds them back enough for him to apologize to Danny, but it's only temporary. Possessed, Jack runs to release the boiler, but despite the urges from the ghosts, he is able to hold off enough to keep the boiler's pressure from being released. There's a very goofy fight with the ghosts. They're arguing amongst each other, and they're trying to like turn the boiler valve themselves. And I'm going to talk about this. But anyway, Jack succeeds in saving his family as the boiler explodes. Then a graduating Danny, who, surprise, is Tony, sees the ghost of Jack, who gives him a final kissin'. That's what I've been missing, which had been a Stephen Kingism catchphrase that we've seen throughout. Okay? So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the faithfulness to the book. The question here is it worth it? Just because a book is in a scene, just because a book scene is included, does it mean it's better? Or does it drag things out? Let's talk about the Hornets as an example. The Hornet scene goes on and on and on. And it's a plot that just doesn't seem to die. And the truth is, it's just not very scary. It's actually not scary at all. And what you get in return is, a more faithful adaptation. But it's just, it doesn't do anything. This movie, it's not thrilling. The movie is not spooky. The movie is not scary. It is not horrifying. The book is scary. The movie is borderline evil. But this is just not. It is hampered by terrible 1997 special effects. At times, very bad writing. At times, very bland performances. And a lack of tension throughout the 6 hours. What you get in return is a more faithful adaptation, and one that centers on the story of the family, not the scares. However, I don't think that that's necessarily the intent. I think the intent obviously was it to be both, to have the scares and the tragedy of this family. But again, the faithfulness, we get these flashbacks. So again, it's faithful. We learn of the Overlook in very overt, clear ways. Unlike the movie, where there is a history there to the Overlook. I mean, the Overlook as portrayed in the movie, you just feel a sense of history. Do we need to know the particulars? I don't think we do. In the book, it's helpful to give us context. But here in this adaptation, the flashbacks that we get, though we get the history, they're not scary, and all they do is they drag the momentum down. It slows everything down to a crawl, and it doesn't provide us anything that we don't already know. And it doesn't give anything to the story or to the experience of watching this movie that adds up to a tone or a vibe or a feeling of danger. Knowing there was a mob hit in the hotel in the past doesn't lead me to feel any more danger for these characters than I would if we just got the sensation of menace. I don't need to know the particulars. So unfortunately, yes, the goal of this movie was to create a more faithful adaptation. However, you're going head to head with a movie that, it kind of took the reins for Stephen King. Like, it was a Stephen King book. It's a Stephen King property. It's something that came from him, but when you think of The Shining, you're always going to think of the Jack Nicholson, Stanley Kubrick movie. You're always going to think about that. That's what pop culture has told us, and for a reason. So I know it's gotta stink It has to be hard to have your baby be completely taken from you, and it's not like it is in the book. However, Stanley Kubrick took something there. He took the book and he took the core part of this book and he turned it into something magical and everlasting and timeless and scary. And what is more of a compliment to Stephen King than to make the most terrifying movie of all time? Because that's what the book could do in book form, and that's what Kubrick did in movie form. That to me is complimentary. And like I said, the word timeless. It's timeless. You can watch it in 1980. You can watch it in 1989. You can watch it in 1997, 2017, or 2027. And it's going to be just as impactful. It's going to be just as scary. It's going to be just as haunting and full of dread and despair and strangeness. And it's going to be off kilter, and things aren't going to seem to be right. You know, you're in a dream. I always talk about David Lynch and dream spaces and dream logic, and it's what Kubrick is operating here. It's you're trapped in a nightmare from the second it starts, and yeah, like the whole point of the book is to watch the progression of this man at the center of this family crumbling, correct? But so Stanley Kubrick went in a different direction, and it's just the entire movie is locked in a bad dream from the start to the end. And it's our experience being trapped with them in a large enclosure, but the suffocation that's there and the claustrophobia that's there. I mean, it makes it hard to breathe as you watch. Like, you have visceral physical reactions while you're watching the Kubrick movie, but here you just don't. You just watch it. And if the Kubrick version is timeless, this is very much of its time, of 1997, with 1997 special effects and 1997 camera pans and 1997 fashion, and it's very much 1997. And as someone who right now is feeling a little nostalgic, there's times I like that. It's fun for some on one level to watch Steven Weber in a chambray shirt tucked into khaki pants, and the shirt is just kind of like billowing out from the belt, and he's got a wide tie on, he's got the parted hair, he just looks, it's just all of it, it's just so 1997. So it's fun to kind of go back in time, but it doesn't add up to anything worthwhile. Unfortunately, it's very much of the time. Now let's talk about Jack. Okay, now look, I love Steven Weber. I'm an unabashed, unapologetic fan of Wings. It is a core component to my childhood. For those of you who don't know Wings or didn't grow up in the 1990s with USA, which would always play Wings on for marathon stretches of a time. Wings was the story of two brothers, Joe and Brian Hackett, who had a falling out. They had owned Sandpiper Airlines in Nantucket, and the entire show was about the two of them coming back together and piloting the plane out of this little airport. And it was a work comedy set at this airport with a great cast of characters, whether it was Roy Biggins or Helen or Lowell. You fell in love with these characters, okay? I know I did. Wings was great. Antonio, Monk himself, Tony Shalhoub. Anyway, so to have Steven Weber and then later Tim Daly, his brother Joe, star in Storm of the Century. It was great to have the Hackett brothers back to back in Stephen King adaptations. So you had me right off the bat in 1997, knowing that Steven Weber, Brian Hackett, was going to be Jack Torrance. And Steven Weber, though in Wings, played the more comedic, brother. He can play just kind of an everyman. and I like his normal approach to this character. He's likable, he's relatable, he's very average, and not in an insulting way. He's an actor's version of an everyman. Um, much in the same way that Tim Daly is able to do a lot of the time. But I mean, as an actor, I mean, everyone needs a paycheck, and it's always good to get exposure. And there's the saying that there's no such thing as bad press, right? As long as you're getting the attention from it. But when you are faced, and I just don't know, like when you are faced with taking over the role of one of the most iconic portrayals in cinema history, with a titan in the industry like Jack Nicholson, whose performance as Jack Torrance is one of the most memorable performances in movie history and in pop culture, do you take that job? Because you don't win. There's no winning from that. There's no chance where you are able to, in the TV format, be able to outdo or step out of the shadow of that titanic performance. Now, do people, take on a mantle from time to time, and do we have these conversations? Of course. We have anyone that's ever played James Bond. We have that conversation of who's the best. Was it George Lazenby? Was it Roger Moore? Those are the only two that played James Bond, as far as I know, right? I don't think there were any others. But then we have the conversation around Batman. Who's the best Batman? Was it George Clooney? Was it Robert Pattinson? But we talk about who was the best. Was it Christian Bale? Was it Michael Keaton? Was it Val Kilmer? Val Kilmer's never in conversation as best Batman. But so we have these conversations. But this is different. This is the Joker. Going back to Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger did find himself in a similar position because the previous performance as an on-screen Joker had been Jack Nicholson. And again, it was, if you don't have Jack Nicholson as the Joker, is Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film as revolutionary as it was? You could argue it isn't. And so whoever had to step into the role of the Joker had that challenge. And they did something different with it. The movie had a completely different tone. It had a completely different reality, different feel, and different interpretation of the Joker. So it allowed Heath Ledger to be able to do something completely different while staying true to what that character is in his own interpretation. However, there's not as much room for nuance or differences here for Steven Weber to be able to portray Jack Nicholson, because at its core, it's still a man devolving into madness or possession or what have you. And it's still, the beats are still there, whether some of the superficial stuff has changed, a mallet instead of an axe. It's still, at the end of the day, it's a guy chasing his family through a haunted hotel, and the devolution of his mental state as he goes along. So unfortunately, just Steven Weber didn't have a chance. He just did not have a chance. And part of it is the madness and possession that he is gripped by. It's inconsistent, and it looks like when they filmed this, they filmed out of order, and he had only taken the job 4 days before it started filming, so it's not like he had a lot of time to prepare, and he was playing catch up. So when you watch this and you see, like, well, he wasn't acting like that, it doesn't really align with how he was acting like last scene, it's because he didn't really have that great of a handle on his character, unfortunately. So unfortunately, this is just, if you're going to compare these things, which we are, you're naturally going to compare the Kubrick version to the Mick Garris version. Jack just completely is dwarfed by the titanic shadow of Jack Nicholson. Wendy, however, Rebecca De Mornay, this is a highlight here. Now, this is nothing against Shelley Duvall. This is nothing against the portrayal of Wendy, who, like I said, fits the movie version of what Kubrick was doing, where everything is there is a danger and a darkness and a malevolence that permeates every cell in terms of celluloid, but also cell in terms of the things that make up our bodies in that movie. And the affectation of Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall in that movie, fits what that movie is doing perfectly. However, do you want to watch a battered woman shake for 2.5 hours? I don't know if that's I don't know if that's how you want to always spend your time. What I like here about this Wendy is that Rebecca De Mornay does play her multifaceted. Like I said earlier, when she is talking to the doctor, she feels guilt. She feels denial. She, is expressing anxiety and worry, and there's just a lot there. And then when she has to take charge, she takes charge. And when she has to protect her kid, you feel as though she has a chance. And I like being able to see that. So that's definitely a highlight there. We have the boiler. This is a famous scene from and a famous plot point from the book. And I guess the question is, what do you want out of the ending of the book? Do you like Jack freezing to death in the hedge maze, or do you like the Overlook exploding? The Overlook exploding clearly provides a more thrilling, action conclusion to the story, and it's a real stake in the heart of the Overlook, this ghostly vampiric structure. But I don't know. I mean, is it worth having in there? I mean, I do like that it's this Chekhov's boiler. It does create a ticking time bomb there at the end. It's fine. It's fine. I think having it is fine. I don't have an issue with it one way or another. It is an effective way to separate it from the movie. I think what they do with it there at the end is ruins all of its goodwill. But I am not opposed to the boiler. There is something haunting about the fact that while Danny and Wendy are able to escape the Overlook in the Shining, in Kubrick's Shining, the Overlook is still there. And it's still just going to wait for the next victim to fall into its mouth. There's something kind of more haunting about that than them killing the Overlook. Escaping is a form of winning. It's a form of survival, and in that case, both versions of the characters are able to do just that, escape. But here, it's clearly they put a stake through the heart of the Overlook. Even if the ghosts are still walking its grounds, the Overlook itself has been robbed of some power. Okay. Now let's talk about the alcoholism and rage versus Jack Nicholson's madness. So Stephen King had issues just because Jack Nicholson was batshit crazy from the start. And here Stephen King wanted to intertwine this alcoholism and rage, and how this influential force is able to exploit these character traits. So what works more? I think on the page, that alcoholism and rage, I think that it's effective, but Jack Nicholson's madness, again, is iconic. And the fact that, maybe Jack Nicholson was never a normal guy, or Jack Torrance was never a normal guy in the reality of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And maybe Wendy just wasn't someone who made good decisions. Maybe she was a meek woman who had been taken advantage of by the more magnetic Jack Nicholson and impregnated, and is now trapped, and always trapped. And now she's physically trapped in this hotel with someone whose madness had always been there, but now it's just exploding. That's basically what The Shining is, the movie. And I understand why it deviates from what Stephen King intended. However, there's a reality there that makes perfect sense to me. And is it more or less impactful than the alcoholism and rage that Steven Weber feels? I don't know. I as much as we talk about Steven Weber's character's father, and as much as we hear Take Your Medicine and Pup, and as much as we talk about the alcoholism piece and him, being a dry drunk before he goes to AA, and as much as we talk about it, I don't know if it ever really coalesces into something that feels right. There's a lot of talk, but that inconsistent showing that we see from Steven Weber, I think that if you're going to compare the two, that constant madness and danger and unpredictability of Jack Nicholson's portrayal, I mean, it's iconic for a reason, and it really overshadows whatever they were trying to do here in the TV movie. Now, the ghosts. The ghosts here are just not scary, unfortunately. Like, the ghosts are alien in nature in the Kubrick version. Come Play With Us, Stanny is haunting for a reason because they don't do anything other than stay there and say it. And then Danny gets the flashes of what really happened. And in doing so, like the juxtaposition of the girls standing there with their mutilated body parts in the hallway covered with blood. It's a horrifying sequence of editing. Um, but the way that the camera slows and the blood falls, or the little glimpses of the party goers, that we get, the man in the bear suit, it's unsettling because at no point are they trying to be human. It's inhuman. The ghosts in the Kubrick movie are inhuman. They might as well just be unknowable demons from the bowels of hell. But here, the ghosts are mustache twirling supervillains. They have personality. At the end, the ghosts are looking at each other in panic. They have human emotions, and it gives them human personalities. And this takes all of the menace out of the conceit itself. The ghosts in this movie are goofy, and they play pranks, and they're throwing confetti, and that's not scary to me. The man in the bear suit is scary. The beautiful woman becoming a bloated corpse, with menace in her eyes, lurching after Jack. It's scary. They don't devolve into monologues. Yes, you get Grady. You do, but that's the only time we see a personality, but the personality is very reserved, very cold. It's hidden behind polite, respectful bartender etiquette, but it's not mustache twirling, it's not stylish, and even there, that dream logic starts to overlap the events where the character itself like goes by a different name. So again, these ghosts are just goofy and to me not effective. And then let's talk about the tone. Okay, I've talked about it already, but let's just really hammer it out for this final point. The original is not faithful, but it is a masterpiece in every conceivable way. You are locked from start to finish in a nightmare. Dread fills these open spaces, and it feels suffocating. This TV miniseries, it just meanders along a more faithful plot, but at what cost? There is never a true sense of danger. Stretched across 3 episodes, this threat ebbs and flows. It never truly builds towards a crescendo. We get repetitive, unnecessary, ghostly scenes of ghost pranks that are a far cry from the murdered twins, the elevator of blood, or the bathtub woman. And while there is some crossover here with the woman in 237 or 217, if you prefer, you just look at these two scenes and the way they play out, you'll see that one is more effective than the other, and it's because of the control of the tone. So all in all, this was an experiment that, to me, I'm happy for Stephen King to be able to, in his own way, reclaim The Shining. But if you're going to go head to head, I mean, to me, there's no comparison. It is the Kubrick version. Okay, then we get Stephen Kingisms. Let's talk about Stephen Kingisms. It is just chock full of the Stephen King catchphrases. We get, because Stephen King, for those of you who are listening, Stephen Kingisms are just the tricks and traits and tropes of Stephen King, that where he employs various patterns across his works. And here we have the Stephen King catchphrases. In this case, we have Doc, we have Pup, we have Come Here and Take Your Medicine, Okay, so those are just three, and Doc, of course, we knew from originally Pup and Come Here and Take Your Medicine. These are new inclusions from the book into this TV miniseries, and it gets hammered over your head more than any croquet mallet could. And then we get Nut and Honey. That's said a couple times, and Nut and Honey. That is so of its time, and what a nice little callback that was to the '90s. Nut and Honey, that was so sweet. But then we get Kiss and Kiss, and that's what I've been missing, which is the final Stephen Kingism catchphrase that we get. That's something that the family says to itself, which is sweet. It's sweet to have. I think that's always important to have that family shared phrase. I think that's very important. It creates a reality. I remember reviewing the sequel to Pet Cemetery, or not the sequel, but the remake of the Pet Cemetery movie, and how bland it was, and it just was not full of these little lived-in realities that are needed to really sell the horror of what happens to this family. So I think that the implementation of Kiss and Kissin', that's what I've been missing, is hokey and a little bit too earnest. But the inclusion itself and the use of it, I think that it's important. So all in all, Stephen King's The Shining is, I mean, I just feel like I'm punching down this entire time. I mean, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but it is, I understand why he did it. I'm happy for him that he did, but it's just, to me, it's not that great, unfortunately. But Stanley Kubrick's The Shining still remains a masterpiece. All right, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed your time checking back into the Overlook with me. And if you have any time on your hands and you want to write in some thoughts about how you feel about this 1997 TV miniseries, write into StephenKingcast@yahoo.com. Follow me on Blue Sky, on Twitter, on TikTok, and on Facebook. And if you have any time, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. At some point, this episode will be available on Spotify. It'll be available on Amazon. It'll be available on YouTube. So if there is a place to recommend or leave a review on any of those platforms, feel free to do so and follow me alongside there. And may you have long days and pleasant nights. And I will see you here next time where MOON spells Stephen King Cast.